Welcome everyone for this in the series of talks at Google. Today we'll be hearing from Bryan Franklin, a business strategist who's helped 7 companies go from startup to over $1 billion. He once coached 35 Google executives and specializes in conditions of massive uncertainty, such as the coming years. His co-author, Michael Ellsberg, previously wrote the book, The Education of Millionaires, Everything You Won't Learn in College About How to Be Successful by Penguin. And his writings have been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Forbes.com.
So it's our conjecture that every one of you is sitting on a massive and massively underutilized asset. And in fact, that in your future, when you look back at what economically and otherwise were your biggest leverage points, your biggest assets, your biggest advantages, you're going to look back on the class of assets that we're going to discuss here as the most advantageous and the most important. And they're probably assets that you're paying almost no attention to, and you might not even think of as investments. So we're going to look at those today and see if we can decode why so many have struggled to make a traditional investing model work for them, why we're in the sort of global economic situation that we're in, and then what we can do about it now.
So before we go into the kind of investing we're talking about, we're going to just do a little overview of the traditional investment advice that's generally given that many of you have probably heard in different forms. We call this the financial advice commonly delivered, or FOCT for short. And it's a pretty simple model. It starts with earn, work a job, earn however much you earn. Then the next step in the model is save as much as possible. The typical advice that you see in a lot of personal finance books is, scrimp and save. Don't drink premium coffee. Have the cheapest coffee you can. Watch videos instead of taking your sweetie out to a movie. Scrimp and save every little penny you can. And then the next step is take those savings and invest them in the market, mutual funds, 401ks, index funds, that kind of thing. And in the plan, they say, watch that money grow. They typically, the figure that they'll cite is that the markets broadly have risen about 7% per year, annualized over the last decades and decades, 80, 100 years. And so that's what they'll tell you to expect. And then if you kind of work all the numbers right and plan everything right, you can then on the growth of what you saved and invest, you can then last step retire when at 65 or when you want to retire. And that's the pretty picture they paint. In our book, we talk about how that plan is broken at basically every step. And rather than go into detail about all the ways we think it's broken, the one thing I'll highlight right now that I think is problematic from that is that really the investing part is totally devoid of anything that has to do with your own human capital. So you'll never hear an investment advisor at Schwab or wherever you go for your investment advice talk about your human capital, the skills and earning power you have as part of your investment plan. They don't even really talk about it. They'll just say, well, your investing is this stuff you do with our funds that we're going to put you in. And that's what investing is. And so it basically separates investing from anything that you have skill or control or domain over, which we think is a pretty big problem. And we're going to talk about that more.
I think one of the reasons why this plan, the plan seems like it would work, right? You earn, you save, you try and save as much as possible. And then you keep reinvesting the growth from compound interest, and over time, then you can stop working and be happy. It makes sense, and it makes so much sense that most people in our generation and most millennials have a vague sense of guilt when they don't follow that plan, just because it's like it's supposed to work. But I think the reason why it doesn't is actually an optimization problem. It's optimizing for one aspect of a system at the expense of the larger system. And anytime you optimize one aspect of any system at the expense of the larger system, of course, eventually will collapse. And I think that's a pretty good characterization for the average, the average American, for example's financial situation. And that's like the richest country in the world. So the section that plan optimizes for is just your financial net worth, the amount that you could be would say that you have in savings and investments, the value of what you have on your balance sheet less your liabilities. And the problem is we actually don't, as humans, we actually don't care about that intrinsically. We don't care about having a lot of static wealth intrinsically. We want static wealth because of all of the other things we think it will get us. Life experiences, access, privilege, options, freedom, choices. So we want access and freedom and choices and experiences, and we think that we need this static wealth in order to have that. But those options and experiences live inside the same system with the finances, with the money. And oftentimes we make choices which limit our freedom, which limit our access, which limit the sense of luxury, which limit our own enjoyment, which limit our ability to have the kind of experiences that we want in order to make more money, in order to save more money, in order to invest more money. And anytime you sacrifice from the whole to accentuate the part, that's when the system would of course collapse. So, broadly speaking, you could say that the purpose of any financial plan is to be happy with your life, and particularly to be happy with your life over a prolonged period of time. The study, that happiness could be arrived at through, again, the freedom to travel, or the freedom not to work, or to live in a particular area, or to have the particular choices. And what's interesting is that the studies on happiness reveal that sudden increases in financial capital, like winning the lottery, over the medium term, after a few months, do absolutely nothing to increase your sense of happiness. In fact, there was a scientist I saw do a talk on the science of happiness, and he began his talk by saying, with respect to being happy, would you prefer winning the lottery or becoming a paraplegic? Which of the two do you think would make you happier? And of course, I'd much rather win the lottery than become a paraplegic, although the studies show that neither of those events have impact on long-term happiness. What does have a impact on long-term happiness, number one, is getting enough sleep. Number two is doing everyday things with friends. So instead of going to the DMV alone, going with your 2 or 3 best friends, doing your grocery shopping with other people. These kinds of things like that have a meaningful impact on your baseline happiness over years and years. Being in service has an impact on your happiness. And of course, learning something has an impact on your happiness. People who are engaged in self-development generally are more happy, more engaged, more alive, more enlivened. When I work with corporations on creating the kind of company and environments that employees are going to be really loyal to, number one is make sure that every employee has a powerful development plan that they themselves are directing, and that they see the company as an opportunity to fulfill on that development. So these are the attributes of things that make us happy, and those are exactly the kinds of things that we would sacrifice in order to make money. Well, I'm going to pull an all-nighter to make sure that I can get the project done so that I might get promoted. I'm going to, more and more work alone. I'm going to, sacrifice sleep, sacrifice time with friends. So we start sacrificing the stuff, the happiness that the money is supposed to get us back later. And that creates a problem because eventually you become unwilling to sacrifice anymore. And when you reach your limits of what you're willing to sacrifice, then you pull back from achievement, and then usually we judge ourselves for for being a bad person because we're not achieving as much as we should. And so you get into that cycle of underachievement, self-judgment, and then pushing and sacrifice, and then underachievement, and then pushing and sacrifice. I think that cycle describes the average work life of many, many people. So what we recommend is a more holistic plan, a plan that's going to suggest that you invest in things that give you more economic opportunity, but also give you more opportunity to be in connection with people you care about, also give you more of a direct opportunity to be developing in the areas that you most care about developing, that the substance of your happiness be included, that you invest not only in your ability to take time off, but you also invest in your ability to enjoy the work that you're doing and to be valuable in a variety of uncertain work environments.
So what would an investment plan look like that took into account some of the things Bryan was just saying? Well, the title of this talk is The Last Safe Investment, Why Investing in Your Human Capital Outperforms Everything Else. So what is human capital? There's a bunch of different definitions. One definition might just be your net present value of your lifetime earnings. That's kind of a technical definition. A more humanistic definition might be everything that you bring to bear to an hour of labor that adds value to that hour, other than the things you're using. So if you're mopping a floor, you're bringing relatively little human capital to that hour of labor. If you're doing the things that you all are doing as engineers and so forth at Google, you're bringing a lot of human capital to each hour of labor. And that human capital multiplies essentially the value to other people and the value you receive financially and non-financially in terms of satisfaction and enjoyment from your labor. And our contention is that, as the title says, that these investments really outperform the FOCT plan type investments. And actually, it's not that high of a bar to beat, especially over the last 15 years. As I mentioned, the plan you see in the books is that the investments are supposed to go up about 7% a year if you're investing in like a low-fee index fund. Over the last 15 years, if you would put $10,000 in the S&P 500 and just watch it grow, these are very rough numbers, roughly, but it would be somewhere around. It's grown. It would be worth somewhere around $16,000 or something now, but that's not counting inflation. If you count inflation, it's hardly grown at all. It's grown maybe like 1% per year. So that's 15 years. That's a third of an average working life. So the plan hasn't been working for a third of the working lives of the people who started this plan 15 years ago. Now, we're not forecasters. Things might pick up. The earnings might be so great in the next 15 years that it makes up for those horrible last 15 years. But
except for the people who wanted to retire today.
Yeah, except for the people who are depending on that last 15 years, starting now. So, the system has really not been working for very many people over the last decade and a half or so. Nobody's happy with it. So what we're saying is you have this other great asset that nobody talks about. If you earn the median household income in America, which is somewhere around $50,000, and probably most of you at Google are earning more than that, but let's just talk about the national median. And let's say you work for 40 years. You have, just in that technical definition of human capital, you have a net present value of somewhere around $2 million of your lifetime earnings. that's a huge asset for a 22-year-old or 25-year-old to have access to. And one of the things that determines your wealth is not just the rate of growth of your investments, but also the base that rate is growing. And so if you are trying to save, the average American saves only a couple $1,000s a year. Even if you're getting, incredible investment returns, you're the best stock picker ever, and you're getting, 25% returns annually, you're starting from such a small base, if that's what you're saving, that that it's hard to make action on that over time. Whereas if you consider your human capital your base, then you can invest in ways that even make small improvements in that over time will have very large impacts on your financial returns and also just the non-financial benefits that come from enjoying your work more, working at a higher level, having higher levels of leadership, working with bigger and better teams that excite you more, harder problems, that kind of thing. So if you imagine, and we're going to talk more about specific investments of your time and money that you can make, but let's just say that you chose to, let's say you're earning $150,000 a year, and let's say you decided to invest $30,000 over a year or two in a bunch of different skill sets that would increase your human capital, your earning. And not necessarily just technical skills, but also things like leadership skills, sales and persuasion. Even if you're not in a sales position, we're always selling our ideas to other people. Communication skills, all the kind of humanistic skills that go along with technical skills to make someone really successful working in a team. Let's say you invested $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 over a couple years, and let's say over time you got a promotion, you started working on bigger problems, you came up with some great idea that was implemented, and then you get, over time you're earning 20% more. And so that 1 year of that pays back your investment, and then if that keeps up for a decade or so, inflation adjusted, you've just gotten a 10x return on that investment roughly. And those kind of returns are very, very hard to achieve on the stock market, especially without just taking insane amounts of risk on. Whereas by our contention, it's fairly predictable the kinds of things that you can invest in yourself to supercharge your already existing technical skills, to make them more valuable to a team, to make them more likely to lead to promotions and higher earning and that sort of thing.
There's a cognitive dissonance where the activity of investing is normally thought to be quite passive, and yet when you start getting into, if you get into a discussion, let's say with an expert in real estate investing, and you start to get into a discussion like, hey, I've got $500,000, I want to invest it in real estate, and I'd like to earn 15% or more. It turns out that the education that you'll need to have in order to make proper use of that money and not risk losing all of it is easily several hundred hours, probably close to 1,000 hours. And like any skill, in order to be really masterful at it, in order to achieve what some people would call passive income, you might have to put 4,000 or 5,000 hours of education time into learning that, so that you can start to have the pattern recognition that you need in order to be successful. Now, if you want to do that, you can be a successful stock trader. You could be a successful real estate investor. You can invest in cryptocurrencies and be successful at that. I'm not saying, or we're not saying, that those aren't vehicles for where you could apply education and turn it into money. I just don't think it's the easiest one. There's a lot of other skills that you can spend a fraction of that time learning that have a much, much higher chance of return when applied to your human capital. And in the book, we actually refer to those skills as the super skills. They're the most rewarded, they're highly compensated, they're universal, and unlike market skills, like for example, a particular technical skill, or learning a particular language, or learning a particular technique, or having a particular ability that you might put on a resume, technical skills and market skills are driven by how the market values that particular skill, which changes over time. And as we enter periods of more and more unpredictability in the job markets and in the global markets, then the value of those skills are also unpredictable. However, the super skills have been value accelerators ever since human beings were interacting with each other. So they're the least likely to change and the most likely to be valued over the long term. And they can multiply your earning potential by 5, 10, even 100 times. If you look at for example, the average CEO in a company in the United States makes 380 times the average employee in the firm where they are leading. I know not everyone here wishes to be a CEO, but if you spent instead of say 500 hours learning how to invest in real estate, if you spent say 100 hours learning the leadership and other types of skills that a CEO has, not because you want to be one, the options that you would have for how much you work, where you work, on what you work, which teams you lead, would be dramatically different. When you're looking at an asset class, an investment class, as an investor, really investors want two things. They want a lot of variability. They want a lot of variance, right? Because if there's no variance as an investor, then you can't make money buying and selling the thing. If there's no difference to be had, and you want a lot of predictability. At least you want to be able to predict. So you want it to go up and down, and you want to know whether it's going to go up and down. And again, the compared with the stock market, the real estate market, and the other readily available types of investments, your human capital has much more variance. There's much more variance in the value in human capital, and it's also very, very predictable. The kinds of things that you can do to increase it will reliably increase it.
So what are these super skills that we're talking about? The basic definition that we have of super skill is any skill that is essentially valuable in almost any context, any job, any industry, any market conditions. So these are very different than, say, the particular programming languages that or technical skills you have. And they're very basic, very human types of skills. How to communicate. So communication skills, leadership skills. There's so many different ways to invest in being a leader. There's so many aspects of being a leader. A very simple one, for example, is public speaking. It's surprising how much you will set yourself apart if you learn how to speak well publicly. And it's surprising how easy it is and inexpensive it is to learn. In fact, I would say, if I had to say the single most highly leveraged investment you could make, probably would be public speaking skills. And you can go to Toastmasters for however many dollars per month, and whatever it is. There's plenty of avenues. This is the kind of thing that can really supercharge your already existing technical skills. It's a bottleneck in a way. Like, take two people who have PhDs and have invested decades of their lives in their education, countless hours, countless hundreds of thousands of dollars, or student debt, or whatever it is. One of them is a horrible public speaker. One of them has spent just a year training to be a public speaker. I know which one I would put my money on in terms of where they're going to go in their career. So the super skills are sort of like bottlenecks. They get rid of bottlenecks. Where are areas where all the traditional human capital you've invested in, your education, your training, your technical skills, where the value of that is not being fully realized because there's some human kind of person-to-person skill set that you haven't fully brushed up on yet and you could take to the next level. Another one that I've mentioned a lot is sales, marketing, and persuasion. And you may hear those words and think, oh, well, I'm not a salesperson. I'm not in the marketing team. It doesn't matter to me. Wrong. anytime you're on a team, you're in sales and marketing. You have ideas, you need to get budget for your ideas, you need approval, you need your higher-ups to sign up on things. These are all sales, persuasion, and marketing problems.
Attracting talent. I mean, there's,
yeah. And they can be learned. They can be learned also in ways that don't violate your basic values of being a decent human being. A lot of people hear those words and they think, oh, well, sales, they think of a used car salesman or something. And that's really bad sales. Good sales is a discipline that actually takes into account what the person being persuaded wants and has them feel really happy about what they're getting and how that ties to what you're trying to accomplish. It's a very human-centric discipline. And another one we're going to be talking about quite a bit for the rest of this talk is building your what might be called social capital. It's a part of your human capital, which is who you know and who your community is, and specifically who your tribe is. And we're going to be talking a lot about this concept of tribe, because it's, we think, the most important aspect of human capital and the least discussed.
My conjecture would be many of you would prefer if we lived in a meritocracy. And most of the people who are highly technically capable that I've worked with often behave as though they live in a meritocracy where the merit of your work stands on its own. And there's something that feels very good about that. And when you can have a relationship with someone where you can see each other's work for what it is and acknowledge it for what it is, that can be quite special. However, it's not the observable world that I see. What I see is that between the results you create and the perception of those results, it's actually the perception of those results that will yield the most acknowledgement from other people. And those other people often are decision makers as to what kind of resources you have access to. Now, also, I would say, if it was a room only full of salespeople, I would say the results actually matter as well, and particularly for your own relationship to how you feel about your work. If you are only managing perception, but the results aren't there, that leads to a very, very dissatisfying experience personally. And since we're talking about how to create an investment plan that actually you end up being happy, you really need both. For the rest of the time, I think we wanted to focus on one of the particular, what we call true wealth assets that really amplifies both your financial wealth, literally the amount of money in the bank, and also amplifies the other aspects of your human capital and the other aspects of what we would call your financial ecosystem, which includes all of the things that your finances are meant to give you, your sense of happiness and freedom and development. And Michael mentioned already that we want to talk about tribe. Tribe is a fascinating asset because it's absolutely coveted the least by those that don't have it. And it's treasured the most by those that do. It's cited by those that do have a strong tribe as the number one source of economic and non-economic opportunity. So we're going to define tribe for you because it means it's a subset of community. Not all communities, in our view, are tribes. So here's what a tribe is. It is a networked, values-based group of friends, right? So it's friendships where each person is deeply connected to each other person. If you have 100 friends, but mostly they don't know each other, that's not a tribe. That kind of hub and spoke model is not a tribe. And it's not a tribe because the value of tribe comes from the network effect, which you're quite familiar with. And the kind of values that you can get, the kind of benefits you can get through relationships, whether it's like you are recommended for a position that you want to have, or there's a project that you hear about that you want to be involved in, or that your unique skills are known and recognized, those kinds of values that you get from relationship, I mean, you probably know 80% of all jobs are gotten by through personal referrals, not through through the HR department with the resume. So that value that you get through individual relationships is multiplied in a network the same way the value of any node is multiplied in a technical network through the network effect. So for it to be a tribe, everybody must know everybody else. It also, for it to be a tribe, must be based on values that the tribe has in common, that each person in the tribe is dedicated to living and to accentuating in each other. So, if you live in a homeowners association, if you have a condo, or where you live has a HOA, that's a community that's based on where you live, not based on values. So it's very unlikely for that to be a tribe. In fact, why most homeowners associations are such a nightmare, if you've ever been on the board of one, that kind of thing, but endless petty fighting is the typical, the typical scene in an HOA. And the reason for that is because you've got a bunch of people who have shared interest, where the decisions impact each other, but they don't have shared values, and that's what makes it so painful. So it's networked and it's values-based, and not just any values, but the values of contribution, meaning where you want to contribute as much value as possible during your life versus just extract as much as you can. The value of development or growth, where you want yourself to be the best version of yourself you can, and you want your friends to be the best versions of them that they can be as well. And then the value of being in service, where you want your collective effort to matter to make someone else's life better. Those three values have to be included in the values that the tribe holds in order for it to be the kind of tribe that's going to yield truly economic benefit for you as well as non-economic. So that's what a tribe is. I'd say the smallest tribe would be probably 15 to 20 people, and according to Dunbar's research, he would say the largest would be 150, because at about, he says 150 is the average number of simultaneous connections you can hold in your mind at one time before you start losing track. Imagine that you have the seed of a tribe. You got some friendships, and maybe you already have a tribe already, and maybe you don't. Most people don't, so let's say you don't.
Could you just maybe explain just a little bit what that might look like for somebody in this room to have a tribe?
Sure. So having a tribe would be, you imagine like there are 35 friends who all are dedicated to similar values, and you find ways of connecting and getting together regularly. Maybe it's every month or every 3 weeks. And you're constantly aware of and tracking each other's progress in your lives in terms of what's important to you and how much of that stuff are you having. It may all be Googlers. It may be a mix of people here and other companies. But what you do have in common is this sense of wanting to develop into the best version of yourself you can be and wanting to contribute. And then so the kinds of conversations you're likely to have are like, hey, what's going on? How are you doing? Tell me about this contribution, or tell me about this thing that you're learning. And you're constantly sharing those kinds of experiences together as friends. So we found that tribe has an absolutely massive impact on a person's felt sense of wealth, and also indeed their actual financial wealth. And when you add the asset of tribe over we've tested it over 10 years, it's the gains that you can get, both financial and non-financial, are just staggering. One of them is something we call the happiness exchange rate. So given that we all want to make money in order to exchange that money for some form of happiness, be it freedom or enjoyment or luxury or prestige or some kind of experience like that, your personal wealth is actually governed to a great degree by how efficient you are personally at making that exchange. how efficient are you at exchanging money for those experiences? So if you spend a lot of money and don't get the experience you were hoping to have from it, for example, if you buy a $100,000 car, but then sitting in the car you don't feel special or whatever it is, or attractive or powerful, or you don't have any of the feelings you were hoping that the car would give you, then in a way you wasted that $100,000. Someone who is able to derive the experiences they want from the purchases they make is going to have a lot more money and a lot more felt sense of wealth than someone who continually needs to spend more and more money, but the experience they were hoping to have eludes them. And it turns out that one of the ways that these experiences that we want are conveyed are through these kinds of networked friendships, where if you want to feel a certain way or be thought of in a certain way, and that's part of your development that your group of friends is aware of and is committed to, then you actually, when you start spending time with them, indeed you start to feel that way and become that thing. So it's tremendously positive from the point of view of your happiness exchange rate, where you have to spend less and less dollars in order to get the same degree of fulfillment. And then there's more and more left in the savings account for you to add to your wealth. And of course, tribes share resources. It's funny, an economist would say that an invitation to sail around the world on your friend's yacht doesn't increase your balance sheet. But if you own a yacht and it's in dry dock and you're paying the maintenance fees, then that is an asset. We would say that the former is an asset and the latter is just a liability, really. So when you have a tribe, if you have 150 people who share resources and share values and share experiences, one of our friends has a 50-foot yacht in Grenada. Another one of our friends has a place in Vail. Another one of our friends has a place in Ibiza. So, there are constantly events that utilize these types of assets, but we don't all need all of the assets. We start to specialize in the kinds of ones that we want to maintain. And since the way to utilize an asset like that is to share it with friends, then all of us are the richer because of it.
Another benefit that comes from tribe that really, in my opinion, is where the financial power of this comes, is the networking and informational aspects of finding about new opportunities. So finding, let's just say within a company, finding out where the hot projects are, where the the kind of inside scoop on what's happening where and what's exciting for you to be involved with, that kind of thing. Who's looking for what kind of talent? If and when someone is ready to to have a different career, or let's say there's an economic downturn and people are getting laid off, it's also a hedge against risk in that two people get laid off, one of them just has a kind of loose connection of friends that they go drinking with after work, and another person is part of a really vibrant tribe, as we're talking about, with a diversity of people who are in different areas and working at different companies. Again, the second one is the person I would bet is going to weather that economic storm a lot more. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, the only search engine that could possibly deliver better and more tailored and more relevant search results than Google is your tribe. It couldn't give you the results on such a wide range of topics, but it can give you for very specific, highly, highly relevant pieces of information, such as where is there someone who might be looking to hire someone with me, with my skill set, or where is there X, Y, or Z type of social opportunity that I'm looking for, dating opportunity, anything like that. Your tribe delivers to you the most relevant, valuable, directed search results possible. And it's a huge benefit both financially for economic opportunity and also for social opportunity. Who do you want to know? What kinds of events? These are the kind of things that massively increase your felt sense of wealth. Because again, money in the bank is important, and we're in no way here to deny that. But as important, if not more important, is how you feel with the opportunities and the things you're able to do with that money. And your tribe really is sort of the filter through which the money in your bank account is going to be filtered into the experiences you have, and whether those are really, really rich and rewarding experiences that feel incredibly meaningful to you over time, or whether they're sort of toss-away experiences that you forget.
Tribe also has a really, to me, a fascinating impact on reputation. If you think of reputation as like stored goodwill, or it could be stored ill will, but let's just talk about positive reputation for now. So if your positive reputation is your stored goodwill with others, which then causes them to reinterpret your what you say, what you do, more positively as a result. And if someone has a very positive reputation, it only takes a small bit of positivity from them, and then you sort of imbue all of the rest of the positivity. Someone with a really positive reputation can get far, far more access. So, and reputation is stored as goodwill in relationships. But if you had a hub and spoke kind of setup, where the relationships between the different people that you were closest to was weak, then goodwill that you would store in one relationship wouldn't transfer to another, because they don't have goodwill with each other. So in a tribe, every time you contribute or help someone along their self-development journey, or give them access to a resource they needed, or offer them a job, or offer them a connection, or an investor, or a co-founder, whatever it is, each time you do that, you get a positive stored reputation, a positive stored goodwill in all of the members of the tribe. And it has this kind of compounding effect, so that your reputation with that group of people can get actually quite astronomical. And that's, so these are just, we took one of the true wealth assets, the tribe, of which there are 3, and we talked a little bit about your super skills, one of the true wealth disciplines, of which there are 3, just to show you how these things can actually have both an economic and a non-economic benefit. And we have about 18 minutes left if you want to go to some questions.
So I actually do have a tribe, and it's a tribe of moms. And I can tell you that when one person's husband got in a serious car accident, they didn't cook dinner for a month, and we only have one carpet cleaner that makes the rounds. But that's very different in some ways from the economic impact of the kind of tribe you're talking about. A group of moms is amazing when you need some emergency childcare, but it's not going to do the same sort of thing in terms of employment networking or financial networking. How does your advice change for people who maybe their natural affinity group isn't white males in high-powered jobs? Like, how does this work if you're Black and in the inner city? Is this actually just amplifying existing inequalities?
That's a great question. So one of the things that's essential to a tribe, and Michael mentioned it very, very briefly, and I think I kind of skipped over it, but is diversity. Diversity is absolutely essential to a tribe. It's good to have some powerful white men in there, but it's much better to have artists and moms and people in various different economic and social conditions, but that each share the same values, because then the perspectives that are brought to the tribe are that much richer. What we've noticed about even we come from California and from Silicon Valley, and there are communities of people who are sort of the powerful Silicon Valley elite, but they're quite stale, and they would not qualify, from my perspective, as a tribe. There's certainly economic opportunity to be derived from those kinds of communities of powerful people, but the non-economic opportunity is quite limited. And our experience when someone like that is introduced to our tribe, or introduced to friends that have a much broader range of backgrounds, is it's incredibly enlivening for them and enriching for them, because it's, again, different perspectives on the same value. But diversity is essential. That's what I say.
I would just add real quickly, if you think of the word richness, it's a word I like a lot, because it may seem like rich means like having lots of one thing, like having lots of money or having lots of gold or whatever. But actually, if you use the word rich as in the richness of the novel's language, or a rich flavor, or a rich musical composition, what it actually means is lots of different things interacting in very subtle and interesting ways. And so, yes, a tribe of just rich white dudes might have a lot of financial wealth running through it, and maybe that's what those people want, but that's just the financial side. And like Bryan said, I've hung out with those kind of people. Anyone who's been to a party of just one type of person in one economic class in one race or whatever, it doesn't have that alive richness. That to actually realize the experiential side of wealth, you want a richness that is not in the richness sense of lots of money, but a richness like lots of different things, lots of different kinds of people, different backgrounds, different outlooks, interacting in ways, again, with some shared value system. We don't want a cacophony, but interacting in different ways so that we're all learning from each other. And that is much more likely to lead to a richness of experience.
Thank you for coming. And I was going to say, maybe I'm more antisocial than I thought, but when you guys started talking about the tribes,
Yeah.
I'm not sure I know anyone in my own network who belongs to a tribe. I'm not even sure I know anyone who knows of a tribe. The numbers that you cited, a minimum of 15, 20 people, and then up to 150, those seem very... those seemed higher to me than what I first expected. So, would you mind sharing a few thoughts about your tribes, where you're in, and how do tribes come about? How do they form and live? And I mean, obviously, I'm not talking about like forced tribes where circumstances like, I don't know, religion or ethnicity or living in the same condo house. Yep. But yeah, how do they work organically?
Yeah. Thank you. That's a great question. People ask us, well, have you used this financial plan you're talking about for 40 years? And the answer is no. I mean, I'm not even 40 years old yet. And so, what is the basis? Why are we up here feeling like we have any credibility to talk about these things? Well, we have been using this plan for about 15 years, and specifically. The part where we feel we've realized the most value and have something very, very tangible that is a thing that we can point to that's really adding value to our lives, is that the cultivation of a tribe, specifically in the Bay Area mostly. Also, we're connected to New York. One thing that's really important to note is it's not centered around one person. So this isn't a cult, this isn't like a religious movement with one leader or something like that. It's a sort of natural affinity of people that have really just had this intention. We're sort of like going around looking for other people who had this intention to live, not on a commune, we actually don't live communally, there's a few group homes, but to live in community, or more than community, what we're talking about, tribe. So it looks like there's a consistency it's the first time I've really felt in my life this sort of consistency of people who care about me, who intend for me to do better in my life, and I intend for them. And it was cultivated, relatively intentionally. And maybe you can talk about how it gets cultivated.
Yeah. I also want to just note that there are those in the tribe who earn less than $30,000 a year, and there are those in the tribe who have a net worth in excess of 100 million. So it's quite a range.
Sure.
And the how is. It begins really with a soul search for you of what you care most about. If you think of, imagine looking back on your life and asking yourself, in what way did you want to change other people's experiences for the better? And if you look at the work you do and the way you like to socialize and the kind of relationships you like to have, the times when you have felt most fulfilled probably correlate to other people being benefited in a specific way. And so I would begin by identifying what that is, and then start to talk with my existing friends about that specific benefit. Like, hey, I noticed that I really care about people feeling this way or having this experience or being benefited in a specific way. And naturally, because they're your friends, some of them will share this value. And then I would start just getting together with them and having dinner parties and having the question, what do you suppose we could do together? That would somewhere in the 2-hour a week kind of time commitment or 1 hour a week. What do you think that we could do together that would maximize that impact or maximize our individual ability to have that impact in our lives? And just start having the question be in the friendships that you have. And that is the sort of nucleus of a tribe. Once you start asking that and answering that together and discovering it together, then you start to gain understandings and technologies for how you can collaborate inside a work environment, outside of work environment, to have that impact.
So the short answer is make your own tribe, or
Yeah, I mean, I would start that, and then what will happen as you do that is you'll start to notice other existing tribes that are currently not on your radar, and then you might glob onto one or be adopted by one or join one. That has happened as well with us.
I think it's interesting that what seems like almost just life advice, you're putting it in a form of investment advice,
Yeah.
which a neat twist.
Yeah.
But taking that as an approach, I think about a lot of your advice seems like it's further investment in your one big investment, which is yourself. It's essentially, a lot of times people think about traditional financial investing as a way of diversifying
Yeah.
over their complete investment in their own skills and abilities, so that they don't, maybe someday they won't have, if they lose some of those skills and abilities,
Yeah.
they'll still be able to eat and have shelter.
Yeah.
So what do you think about the diversification question?
I think, so first of all, I don't think we can diversify other than ourselves. I think we have the one unit here. And the way that the principle of diversification to me applies to this life advice is to invest in the kinds of relationships and the kinds of skills that are valuable in the most diverse situations. In terms of there's this idea of retirement, or when I want to stop adding value but want to still be getting value. And the way that we address that in the book, in the plan, is to look at the idea of advisor equity, or how can you start to have the kinds of contributions that you make be divorced from the time you spend making them, which is a further advanced concept. But if you're invested in, say, a tribe of 150 people, which are diverse people, and you're continually building positive capital with them, then more and more their success can be a part of your future financial success, and we can all share basically our future benefit. The more the tribe starts to span generations, the more the elder generation is taken care of by the generation that is in their working prime.
One thing I would add to that also, on this question of diversification, is our belief is that you should not be risking money just to get more money. So basically, everyone needs savings. We need savings, perhaps a lot of savings, to weather different storms or to retire, to not have to work for some period. But in our opinion, that should really be savings. Like, a lot of people think when they put money in a 401k, that's savings. No, it's not. That's investing. That's risking. I mean, people saw just how much that is risking. Same thing with a home. Home equity is not savings. It's an investment that is taking a lot of risk, actually. And we saw the risk again, about 10 years ago. In our opinion, or in my opinion, the types of risks the ways we should risk our money involve doing things where it's a project where money isn't the only thing we're going to get back, and there's some value actually occurring in the risk itself, that there's some experiential value in the risk of, take something like, I'll just say an example from my own life. I'm a writer. I just invested 6 months of my time and quite a bit of money getting a manuscript ready for possible, an agent and possible publication. It didn't end up working out. I won't go into all the details, but basically nothing came of that 6 months. Now, had that been purely like me spending that time or the time value of the money and putting it in a stock, and then the stock went to zero, I'd be pretty pissed about it and pretty bummed. But actually, I was able to learn things from this experience. I was able to get ideas. I was able to come away from it feeling like, okay, well, it didn't turn out the way I wanted, but I actually learned something, and now I'm going to go in this direction. So it has this sort of experiential quality where the money being invested was tied up in things that had kind of a tie to my life narrative in such a way that the risk almost wasn't a risk. It was just part of doing the things that I wanted to do in life and learning, which is what we all do. So yeah, diversification of like some things that are really, really, really low risk, and then the things that are higher risk are tied up in the things you actually care about and the kind of narrative that you're building of your life story.
I also want to point out that it's an important economic theory, it's an important investment theory, but it actually hasn't worked out for the average person. 98% of baby boomers say they don't have enough money to retire. So it hasn't worked, is the problem. If the existing advice was working, then I think we probably wouldn't have written the book. And the theory of diversification, again, for it to take hold, requires a massive education investment investing in that particular asset class to learn what is actually diversified and what isn't. So that's I would just remind you of that part.
I was just wondering how you reconcile. My mom was a public school teacher growing up, so it was all about not being in a clique, right? And kids would be like, "Be in my crew. I like you." And I've been following her advice through high school, college, business school, etc. And so when I get approached, be in my lean-in circle, or be in my crew, or we're a clique, we're the girls, we're the plastics, whatever it may be, great pitch, right? I've been declining on purpose and following my parents' advice not to be part of a said tribe where there are a distinct number of people in a group.
Yeah.
So how do you reconcile that advice and your own to try to create a tribe?
Sure. So the first is that the cliques that you were told not to join had as a primary value exclusion of others. That was like their number one deal, was to exclude others. And for any tribe to be healthy, it has to have porous boundaries. People have to be able to join and leave as it suits them without much drama. And the way that you would join our tribe is if you had the same values and you started to hang out. Or you knew someone, you got invited to an event, and then you were at the event, you wanted to come to another one, and then you were there. If you were there more often, you're going to be in, provided that you are actually living in accordance to the values of service and contribution, of freedom, of devotion, and of growth. So I think the difference between a healthy tribe and an unhealthy clique or even a cult is the values that it's centered around. And they have to really resonate as your values. So that's the first thing I'd say.
What does Jennifer call it, like a duocracy or something? Like basically.
Oh, effortocracy.
Yeah, effortocracy. Like the cliques you're talking about, like it's about prestige and who's cool and who's not cool, and a better metric we think is a tribe that basically the people who are doing the most to create the events or make things happen for people or support each other, they're the ones who are kind of rising naturally to leadership. Like, so it's almost like an effortocracy rather than a coolocracy.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us. Thank you for taking an hour out of your day. Yeah.